until now, I've focused on large format printers on this channel, so when GearBest asked if I'd be interested in reviewing a couple of much smaller printers, I was kind of intrigued. Today I'm going to be looking at the Geeetech E180 and the Tevo Michelangelo. They're both pretty similar in size and features, but they each have some unique things about them. Which of these is better? And is it even worth buying such a small printer when there are things like the Creality CR10 in the world? Well, let's see. These are both fairly similar in terms of how you assemble them, which is to say you don't assemble them at all. You do have to put the feet on the Tevo on the left there, but generally speaking, these are just the kind of printer you can take out of the box and start using right away. Pricing on these kind of things varies quite a bit, but at the moment the Tevo Michelangelo is about $210 US, and the Geeetech E180 is about $260, so there's about a $50 premium you're paying to get the Geeetech. With that out of the way, I'd like to go ahead and take a closer look at these printers. Let's start with the Geeetech. Or maybe it's Geeetech, I don't know. Either way, you get an extra E in there, free of charge. The body of the printer is made of plastic with a kind of pearlescent white coating, and it looks quite nice. Compared to the Spartan industrial look of many 3D printers, this one looks like it's trying to be some kind of higher-end appliance, and for the most part, I think it pulls it off. They've tried to hide a lot of the parts of the machine that you would normally be able to see, like the hot end and the stepper motors and so forth. And that does give it a nice sort of all-in-one look, although when you're actually using the machine, as I will discuss, it can make it a little bit difficult to see what's going on. This doesn't come with a whole lot in terms of accessories. There's a USB cable and a micro SD card, as well as a metal spool holder that I was unable to assemble because it had been drilled wrong. Unlike every other printer I have, this actually uses an external AC adapter rather than just a PC power cord that you plug into the printer, just something to keep in mind. It comes with a non-heated aluminum bed and has a print volume of 130 millimeters on each side, or just over 5 inches. That's actually quite a bit smaller than the entire size of this bed as you see here. There's some unused space on either end. This originally came with some blue tape to put on the bed, but I've gone through that, and instead of using strips of painter's tape or something like that, I just cut a piece of milled tack type material and put it on there, and it's been working fairly well. It has springs at each of the 4 corners of the bed, but if you actually want to adjust the bed level, you need to use an Allen wrench and turn these here. It can be a little bit inconvenient, especially because I like to see how the first layer goes down and then do some tweaking. Around the back we have a USB port which you can use to connect a computer to this, although I've never actually done that. I don't particularly like printing from a computer. And there's also a micro SD card slot. I wish it was in the front, to be honest with you. It's a little hard to reach all the way back there. One feature I do really like is the color touchscreen. I wish all printers came with something like this, frankly. I find it a lot easier to use than the scroll wheel and menu arrangement on most of my other printers, so I definitely am a fan of this. The printer itself does seem to be a little bit slow to respond when you make a selection in certain cases, though. This is the leveling screen, which is sort of an assisted leveling. It doesn't have any automatic leveling features, but you can use this to move the head around the bed and allow you to relatively easily use a piece of paper or something like that to adjust your bed level. On the filament screen, you can preheat the nozzle and also manually extrude or retract your filament, which is kind of nice. The other items on the screen, like fan and speed, are probably not things that you're going to be using a whole lot, but you might want to slow down a print or something like that. It does have a Wi-Fi feature, but you can only use it through their app, and for that reason I haven't been able to actually use it for reasons that I'll get into in a little bit. The other settings here, we have language, Chinese or English, screen calibration, just calibrating the touch screen. About gives you a little information about the printer, and factory default, of course, restores everything to the factory settings. Finally, if you select the print item, you'll get to the print screen. Right now I don't have a memory card installed, so let's put one of those in. There we go. Just select the item you want to print. It'll have a check mark next to it. Then press the print button to actually start printing. Once you have a print in progress, you can pause it or stop it using the buttons below here. And you should also be able to recover a print that is interrupted when the power goes out. In addition to the printer itself, they also have an Easy Print 3D app that you can get on your phone or tablet. It's got some social aspect, which is kind of interesting, where people print and then post what they've printed. They've got a remote printer controller feature, and then some galleries of 3D models that you can download and print directly from your device. But as you can see here, it's really laggy, and if you just even scrolling between different screens takes a long time, so it's difficult to use in that sense. Also, I have not been able to register and log into this, and so I actually can't use any of these features. I always get this error whenever I try to log in. I've tried a couple different emails and various ways of doing it and haven't had any luck. Even if I could log in, though, I don't think I would actually be using this app. Basically, everything that it does can be done better with a site like Thingiverse or something along those lines. I suppose it could be useful for people who wanted to be able to use a 3D printer with just a mobile device like a tablet or a phone, but that's not me. The only thing that might be sort of interesting is the remote monitoring and control of the printer, but without some sort of camera to show you what's happening on your print, it's of very little usefulness. Speaking of monitoring your prints, as you can see, it's pretty difficult to see what's going on because of this kind of guard that they've put on the gantry here. You can see it if you get way down and squint. You can sort of see what's going on, but it's not easy, which is a bit of a problem when you're trying to put down the first layer and see if you've leveled your bed properly and so forth. The nozzle, by the way, is not the standard 3D printer nozzle that you see on most printers. It's kind of a combined unit that has the thermistor, heater, and nozzle all together in one unit. And you can remove it fairly easily by pushing a lever. And that's nice if you need to replace it. Oftentimes it's difficult to get a nozzle off of a printer. But it does cost about $17, at least on Amazon, to get a new one, which is way more expensive than a normal nozzle. So I'd like to introduce some of the things that I printed on this machine. For the most part, I used 0.1 millimeter layer height, so I'd get nice fine resolution, although this particular Java here was 0.2. And I used Simplify 3D to slice everything, because that's what I'm used to and I prefer it. However, I wasn't able to find a profile for Simplify 3D for either of these printers, so I had to just kind of make up my own settings, and that was a little bit of a problem with this printer. When I was using the standard profile that I have used with other printers, I found that this printer would under-extrude noticeably. In other words, it wouldn't put out enough plastic. I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute, but in order to get results like this, I had to up the extrusion multiplier in my slicer, Simplify 3D, to about 1.25 or so, which is quite high, but I couldn't figure out any other way to fix this problem. You can see here a piece that I stopped partway through. If you look at the infill here, it's very, very weak. You can just break it with your finger, and the perimeters here, the walls of the print, aren't bonded together, so they're not forming a single piece. They're just sort of sitting next to each other. So that means this is very weak. You can see some telltale signs of under-extrusion on the bottom as well. You can almost see through the layers there. And of course the sides aren't bonding together either. Upping the extrusion multiplier does help with this, but I think it also can adversely affect quality in some cases. Anyway, one thing I wanted to show you was this model of Doraemon, the cat-type robot from the future, if you're familiar with him. He's a Japanese manga and anime character. This is a multi-part model that you print in different parts, different colors, and then assemble them together to make a pretty credible looking model here, especially if you look at it just, from a slight distance. You might think that this was something that you bought. I used a ballpoint pen to kind of just fill in the whiskers and eyes and so forth to give it a little bit more detail. All of the models that I'm going to be talking about today will have links in the video description below, just so you know. This is a popular model called the Zombie Hunter, and one reason it's popular, I think, is that it basically prints without support and prints pretty well, actually. There's a little bit of stringiness in places, or just sort of roughness, I guess you'd say, but for the most part it came out quite well. I will say that the bottom ended up being not completely flat because it sort of curled up a bit. This was before I started using glue stick on the build surface. I think that really does help. Wanted to try something a little bit more involved, so I printed this Homer Buddha, which requires a fair amount of support in various places. It came out really well in some places, and then there's patches where it's kind of rough, as you can see here, and I'm not really sure. There's also some under extrusion. This was before I tweaked my settings a little bit. Overall, though, it came out well. I was impressed, especially at the top here on his head, that his little 2 individual hairs printed out pretty well. I did have to use support for them, but still. Just to give you an example of one of the problems I did encounter with this machine, I was trying to print this bust of Rachel from Blade Runner by Toshi TNE, and I had all these burn marks. I guess some filament got stuck in the nozzle and burned or something. I don't really know why this happened, especially like where it did here in the print up at the top. I tried again after cleaning out the nozzle here, and while it's improved, it's still pretty bad. So I ended up having to buy a new nozzle since I had already clogged up the extra one that it came with, and that did solve the problem, to be fair. But I have had some issues with clogging on this machine. We'll come back to the E180 in a few minutes to give you my final conclusion, but first let's take a look at the Tevo Michelangelo. In contrast to the sort of shiny plasticky look of the E180, we have the Michelangelo here, which seems like a more industrial machine. It's made out of sheet metal and just feels quite solid. It did come out of the box with some scratches right here on the front, though. I like that it uses a regular size SD card, and it's positioned there right on the front for easy access. Like the E180, this doesn't really come with a lot of accessories, the memory card, cable, that sort of thing. It doesn't even come with a spool holder, so you're going to have to supply your own if you actually want to print with this. Unlike the E180, this does use a standard 3D printer nozzle, so you could conceivably change it out with a bigger or smaller nozzle, or a nozzle of a different material if you want. You'd be forgiven for thinking that this has a smaller build volume than the E180, but in fact it's actually a bit bigger. This has a 150 millimeter build volume on all axes, and that's roughly 6 inches, just a little bit under. Like the E180, this is a non-heated bed. It comes with some sort of Tevo branded build tack-like material already installed. You adjust the bed level with these thumb screws here, which are very difficult to turn, I've found, especially, well, they're very tight, first of all, and then the one in the back here in particular is hard to reach. But I will say that once you get it leveled, you don't really have to mess with it very often. The interface is the same Marlin-style interface that we have on the CR10 and other printers. You just use the knob to the right to scroll through various menus and so forth. It's okay. I will say that sometimes you will move the knob one and it won't actually move anything on the menu, so it's a little bit frustrating at times. But all of the standard menu options are there that you might expect. One thing you may notice is that this screen is considerably harder to see than anything we've seen on the CR10 or other printers. In fact, this is by far the worst screen on any printer that I've used, but it gets even worse because if you move up, this is looking at it straight on, if you move up and look down on it as you would if you're putting the printer on a table or something and looking at it from above, you can't hardly see it at all. I thought maybe mine was defective, but apparently it's just the way it is. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the prints I made on this printer. By the way, one thing I really like about this printer is that when it's done and it's no longer printing and it's cooled down, it doesn't make any noise at all. It shuts off all the fans. So anyway, this Java came out really, really well, actually. It's basically flawless. I don't see any problems with it at all. Very, very clean print. And that's kind of a theme you're going to see with all of the prints that I'm going to show you today coming off of the Tevo. Next up, we have a bit of a different kind of model. This is a robot that you print in place and then fold together. I first saw this on the 3D Maker Noob channel on YouTube, and this is actually something you have to buy from the website called Fab365, but it was well worth it, I think. It's just very creative. You fold it up here, and it makes a very cool-looking robot that you could really not achieve in any other way. It has movable arms that are articulated in two places. It's got movable legs, and it's a very clean look as well. No supports needed or anything like that. Just came out perfect. You probably would be forgiven for thinking that this was some kind of toy that someone had bought. I'm really impressed with it. You'd have to sort of work the legs free a little bit, but yeah, it came out really well. I was originally intending to print this on both printers and use it as a comparison, but I discovered that the E180 is actually too small to print this model by a little bit, and because of the nature of the model, I didn't think resizing it was really an option, so I'm just going to be doing it on the Tevo. I decided to print several more of the busts from Toshi TNE because I thought it might be a good point of comparison. Actually, this one I only did on the Tevo, but this Han Solo bust came out extremely well. It's amazing, actually, how high quality this is. There's really no flaws on it anywhere that I can see. I kind of wish I had done this in a different color so you could see it a little bit better, but I actually think this is one of the most impressive busts that I've printed. It's basically flawless. Here's the Rachel bust that I had so much trouble with on the E180, and again, it's really flawless. There's no problems that I can see on this at all. As I mentioned, these are all done at 0.1 millimeter layer height, so they take a little while, a few hours to print, but not terribly long. And the end results are quite impressive. I think they speak for themselves. Finally, we have this bust of Luke Skywalker, also by Toshi TNE. I've printed this one before, but I like it quite a bit, so here it is again. And I actually printed this one on both printers. Here on the left is the one printed with the E180, and on the right, of course, is the Tevo. And you can see there is some noticeable banding on the face of the E180 print, and just some general roughness that you don't see on the Tevo print. As I mentioned, I had to bump up the extrusion multiplier for the E180 to keep it from under extruding, and that may be the cause of some of these artifacts we're seeing here, but I have played around with the settings quite a bit, and I'm not sure that I can get a lot better than this in terms of quality from the E180. So what's my conclusion about these printers? Well, I don't really think that the E180 is a bad printer, and I kind of respect what Geeetech was trying to do with it in terms of making it more user-friendly and all. And I'll certainly be the first to admit that the screen on the E180 is way better than the one on the Tevo. But I don't think that and the app of questionable usefulness actually merits a $50 price increase, especially when you take into account the fact that the Tevo has significantly better print quality, at least in my experience. While I really don't like the screen on the Tevo, that's really my only complaint about it. It's quite a good deal at $210. And in terms of quality, I've gotten some of the best prints I've ever made on this little machine. As I mentioned at the start of the review, I've mostly been focusing on large format printers and large print projects on this channel, so I wasn't sure I'd really even have a use for a small printer like this. In fact, you can fit both of these printers entirely on the build plate of my Creality CR10S5, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it. But I don't always want to make gigantic prints that take days to finish, and there's something to be said for having a machine that has consistently high quality like this. So moving forward, when I need to print something small that'll actually fit on this build plate, I think I'll be using the Tevo Michelangelo for that. If you're wondering if this would make a good first printer, I think it probably would. At around $210, it's not a huge investment, so you may be able to use it to sort of test the waters and see if you're actually interested in 3D printing. Obviously, if you want to do something a little bit more involved, like props or costumes, you're probably going to want to go for something bigger like the CR10. Once again, GearBest.com did supply these to me for free for review. If you want to buy either one of these, there are some affiliate links in the description below. They don't have any specific coupons for these particular printers, but they are on flash sale at the moment, I believe. Thanks very much for watching.